What is real? This may sound like some odd philosophical question that a bunch of college students in their dorm room talk about, when they're doing substances at night, but it's actually much more serious than that. It's actually a question that goes right to the core of many of the problems in Western political discourse right now. It's a question that reflects the kind of society we live in right now in the West, a society where almost every single thing that is reported by major media, that is reported by mass media, or that happens is seen as a psyop or seen as some attempt to control the minds of the masses and manipulate them towards some nefarious ends that those in the upper echelons of the power structure have in mind. And while this thinking is largely a reflexive reaction to the mass propaganda of yore, which has been grave and which has had immense impacts on the American people and on Western civilization, it is in many cases an overreaction that has to be addressed before we drift totally into an age of informational nihilism, where nothing is real and everything is constructed for the purposes of domination. If you guys think I'm being alarmist here, which is not something that I do, by the way, I don't believe in telling you things to get views or telling you things just to get your attention. I believe in telling the truth. But here's the funny thing. When you get into a lot of political conversations these days about world events, whether it be about the recent Israel-Palestine conflict or about any major event that has happened recently in America, there will always be some person who will arise from their ignorance and will say, well, did you hear about that? Or did you hear about this? And they will try to manipulate and contextualize those events in the context of power and deceit and propaganda. And that limits them from being able to actually see the world outside of that prism of propaganda, power, and domination. This is the problem with the woke left. The woke left sees everything in terms of power conflicts, structures, and domination. Well, there are elements of the political right which also inadvertently see things in that way as well. Now, as I mentioned, I think there are some good examples of this phenomenon I'm talking about happening recently. For example, when the Israel-Palestine conflict began, and there was fighting happening back and forth, Jack Posobiec, a prominent commentator on Twitter, posted videos of Hamas doing something on his Twitter, and the comment right below that says, how do we know any of this is real? This could all be a movie set. During the Ukrainian war, when it first started, and Zelensky was allegedly in the city, there were many people around social media that said that Zelensky wasn't actually in town. He was somewhere in some foreign country, and everything was a green screen to make it look like he was actually in town. When Biden was first elected, there was a core contingent of people that said that Biden actually didn't go to the White House. Biden, the real Biden, was replaced by a clone or something, and this was actually getting mileage in political conversation. Of course, there are all kind of different theories, all kind of different speculations. But when it comes to a point that the default assumption for all of us is that any major event of significant impact is faked or is created by those in power, the World Economic Forum or the CIA or the NSA or whatever, we can't interact with reality because our minds are clouded by our own bias towards the power worldview. Now, let me give some credence to this reflexive reaction. The government has lied to Americans many times over. The government not only has lied to Americans, the government has literally planted seeds of falsehood into major media for decades to manipulate the public's attention and affection towards certain ends. That's happened. Look at Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA, as exposed by the Church Committee, which was a congressional committee that exposed all of this, was exposed putting assets in major network media throughout the 50s and the 70s, and using that to manipulate the narrative towards certain things like the Vietnam War, supporting that, using it to manipulate the narrative against certain social groups that they found as being subversive. And when the Church Committee was actually investigating all this stuff, George George Bush, who was leading the CIA at the time, told the Church Committee, elected members of Congress, to point their inquiries in a different direction. So the CIA basically blackmailed Congress members not to investigate them. That happened. The FBI in the COINTELPRO program also planted stories in local media to besmirch groups like the Black Panthers and other Vietnam anti-war protesters that they found to be subversive. That happened. Even more recently, forget the 20th century. Let's go to the 21st century. When Obama illegally invaded Libya without congressional authorization and said, I'll go to the UN instead, the CIA began planting stories about how Gaddafi was sending his soldiers to rape everyone. The media uncritically played that story and used it to incense the West and drive the conflict against Gaddafi. But it came out later that that story was actually false and planted by CIA assets in the media, confirmed and verified that that was a false story. Time and time and time and time and time again, we have seen the evil collusion between government and media. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a court case that actually came out and said, yes, the government did, and the medical community in coordination with government did manipulate information towards particular policy ends. This happened. That's true. It's absolutely true. But let me ask you this. We have all these instances of corruption and these instances of propaganda that we know happened. But if we took this worldview further enough, the worldview that says that everything is a construct and a lie and a set and a psyop, then we would never be able to tell the distinction between the truth and falsehood. We would never be able to tell if the government was manipulating and lying to us, because that itself could actually be a psyop, thinking the government is lying to you. Do you see what I'm saying? This worldview has no guardrails because it is fundamentally not even a skeptical worldview. It is a nihilistic worldview. It is important to be skeptical. Skepticism is actually the difference between deceit and truth. The light of truth is only found when someone is willing to critically examine what's in front of them, question it to a very, very, very significant degree, and then deduce a proper conclusion on the basis of that questioning. But skepticism, which is the search for truth by the reasonable application of your reason, is not this bias that presumes that everything put out there, or most things put out there, are some kind of lie, fabrication, or a story meant to manipulate you. That is not skepticism. That is nihilism. But if you take this worldview further enough, it implies a few things that actually are quite concerning. If most of what we see and hear is manufactured by a particular power interest to control us and subvert our thinking and manipulate us, then only people in those power classes have the ability to know the truth. Once again, we're getting into this idea that truth is a matter of power, and it's a matter of status, not a matter of critical thinking and investigation. This is the same thing, again, that many leftists who are on the deconstructionist left believe. They literally believe that truth is created by the society, by the power structures to push certain narratives. They use things like John Baudrillard, whose idea of the simulacrum basically says this, and that idea actually influenced the creation of the Matrix franchise. So this idea is not new, but when it's applied to conspiratorial thinking, and it's applied to current events, you get a very chilling effect on the ability to find truth, because this implies that anyone who is not in that power structure, or anyone who is not going to risk their life and put their neck out there to investigate the power structure and infiltrate it, by the way, a lot of those people are called controlled opposition, even if they're not, whatever that means. That would basically say that no one beyond those two classes has agency or has free will. But that's not true. The fact that there are truth tellers and truth seekers in society, the fact that we have the ability to still know things for certain, or at least close to certain, and to expose the lies of those in power, demonstrates that not everything is a psyop constructed against our minds or against our wills. And what really disturbs me about this entire thing, my friends, is that we have taken a good thing, criticism of authority, And we have allowed our inherent human passions to distort it and twist it into an emotional fetish for contrarianism. An emotional fetish which basically, reflexively says, if I hear it from the government or I hear it from an established authority, it is automatically false. So what's the other alternative then? Well, there's two alternatives. If you believe everything from established authorities are false or everything that is the mainstream narrative is false, there's two alternatives. You can either believe whatever you happen to find, and good luck finding information outside of mainstream sources, or at least non-mainstream sources that don't actually use some manner of mainstream sources for their reporting. Even alternative websites will actually use mainstream sources for their reporting. Good luck with that. Or you will rely on a personality who you believe has found the truth to actually do the work for you. This is what a lot of people do. They will rely on personalities on Twitter, on YouTube, or whatever to look at information for them, and they will view them as truth seekers, as these sort of indispensable conveyors of what is right. But the problem with that is you are outsourcing work that you should be doing to someone else, number one. And number two, if that person were to ever disappoint you, or that person were to ever make you suspicious, because you're already operating from a viewpoint that everything is controlled. So if that person makes you suspicious they're actually being controlled, they're actually controlled opposition, then your pursuit of truth that was outsourced just stopped because the person that you trusted, or the people that you trusted, made you suspicious. This is how this nihilistic mindset defeats us. My friends, reality matters. Reality matters. Philosophy matters. Thinking matters. And a reflexive reaction to every major event, to every major narrative, as being false or being construed by the power structure is not in coordination with reality. This is not to say to accept everything the government says. Of course not. As someone who's a constitutional conservative, who is a philosophical libertarian, and this is in the sense that I am very skeptical towards the government, toward authority, and towards power, I am the first person to say, what does the orthodoxy say? And most of the time say, if the orthodoxy says X, it is important to see if Y and Z are proper alternatives to X. I'm the first person to say that. But what I won't say is that X is always in every single case wrong. Because if I were to say that to you, and I were to sell you that vision, I would never have the ability to question my own thinking. And if I can't question my own thinking, then beyond propaganda, beyond anything I can see in the external world, I will never be ready to receive the truth. The truth is this. Many people who have this psyop mindset, that believe that everything's a psyop, wouldn't be able to identify the truth if it was standing right in front of them, because they have embraced the idea of a post-truth world. In my opinion, you can fix this problem through a few means. We can fix this problem by encouraging the decentralization of information. You see, a lot of people that have the psyop mindset, that believe that everything's a psyop, probably believe that because a lot of information is centralized into a few sources, and those sources are subject to political capture and manipulation. Well, the more information streams that you have accessible to you, the greater the chance of information capture or political capture goes down. That's one way to fix it. But another way to fix it is simply by encouraging people to critically think about things. This sounds like a cliche and a slogan, but it's not. Because critical thinking is not just about questioning things. It's also about questioning yourself and looking at evidence for what it is. Oftentimes we'll say, this evidence comes from the New York Times, comes from Fox News, and therefore this evidence is not reliable. Well, no, this is called the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy basically says that the source of the information, not the content of the information, matters the most, which is not true. I don't care who says the truth. If the truth is the truth, it is no different coming from Fox News, New York Times, Al Jazeera, or whoever. But we get so caught up in names, so caught up in personalities, so caught up in brands. And the worldview, the power worldview, encourages this. Because the power worldview never wants you to consider things outside of the structures and the institutions that control or cultivate or mediate knowledge, they want you to see just those things and to ignore everything else. But what if I were to tell you that the individual matters? What if I were to tell you that you have more ability to get information than you think? What if I were to tell you that with the advent of the digital age, there is more possibility for you to find out what is true than there was in the 60s when you had NBC, ABC, and CBS as your only options for information, or your local newspaper, which was also probably funded by money interest? What if I told you that? A lot of folks still don't want to believe it. We are in a philosophical crisis, my friends. Nihilism is never the way to go. Because if nihilism is the standard that we embrace, we will never be pushed. We will never be pushed to push ourselves. We will never be encouraged to seek out more information beyond our current information streams. We will never truly be able to even accept that certain things happen. There are people that are saying that certain school shootings are all just crisis actors and all that kind of stuff. There are people saying that the attacks in southern Israel actually didn't happen because there's evidently no proof that Hamas did it, and that was all just a propaganda thing planted in the stores, when we have real, actual evidence and footage of Hamas going to kibbutzes, shooting people in their cars and breaking in. But people are saying that's edited or AI generated. If you accept this, then you are potentially endangering yourself. Because if you don't live in reality or don't accept reality, reality won't really care and it'll move on without you. There's a standard I think that we should use when questioning events that make us cautious. And this will be my last point. We'll call it the holistic standard. I don't know. And the standard goes something like this. When faced with an extraordinary claim that lacks extraordinary evidence, it is always best to pursue alternative explanations with the possibility that your inquiries could be flawed or your collection of evidence could be incomplete. In other words, I'm arguing for humility. You don't know that every single thing is a psyop. You don't know that every single thing is a lie from the government. You don't know that. There's no way for you to know that unless you're omniscient. You can make guesses, you can make educated decisions, I guess, but you don't know that. And to be honest with us, it's very hard to know things for certain. This is why I embrace the idea of common sense realism, which basically says, yes, I can't prove everything, but I know that if I don't assume some things, I can't live life. I can't prove that we're not in a simulation. But I know that if I live my life like we're in a simulation, then I can't live my life at all. Because that'd be nonsense. That would lead to so many destructive conclusions that it wouldn't be worth it. I can't prove, I guess, that, I don't know. I can't prove certain things that are indispensable to life. But if I don't assume those things, then I can't live my life. That's the standard we should embrace when it comes to our information diet. Because if we embrace that standard, it might allow us to cope with the propaganda that Israel and does exist, while also allowing us to understand that truth matters, reality matters, and through diligent application of reason and the exploration of different alternatives, we will be able to get close to something approximating the truth. And my friends, object to the Psyop worldview, object to the power worldview, embrace reason, study history, study philosophy. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.